Gen Z are miserable. They're more depressed, lonely, and anxious than any other generation before them. They're struggling with addictions, their job satisfaction is plummeting, and they have no real hope for the future. But how did it get this bad? Is it even their fault? And more importantly, can anything be done about it? The truth is, Gen Z are the victims of a cruel social experiment. They're the first to grow up with two forces that never really existed before. In this video, I'll break down these hidden forces that have shaped Gen Z's biggest issues and why it's crucial that we understand them. Whether we like it or not, Gen Z are the future. And if we can bridge the gap between generations, there's a real chance that we can support them in building a better world for all of us. Why helicopter parenting created an anxious generation. Gen Z grew up with insanely overprotective parents. No other generation has ever experienced this level of coddling. Every aspect of their life was overseen and managed. They had zero freedom. Their social lives became organized by playdates. Their grades in school were closely monitored. Their parents drove them to and from endless extracurricular activities, just so their children could get ahead and not fall behind, whatever that means for a 10-year-old. And one of the worst aspects of this kind of parenting is that they try to protect them from everything. In the book, Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt wrote that these helicopter parents try to raise their Gen Z kids in a bubble of satisfaction, protected from frustration, consequences, and negative emotions. The thing is, kids need friction. That's how they develop real confidence in their abilities. That's how they learn to tolerate frustration, control their impulses, regulate their emotions, and get along with others. Without this, they become neurotic snowflakes. But really, through no fault of their own. There's this term called anti-fragile that Nassim Taleb coined, which describes this need for friction. Things that are anti-fragile are those that not only withstand shocks, volatility, or adversity, but actually grow stronger from them. They become more resilient and adaptive when exposed to challenges. It's a well-known fact in psychology that exposure reduces fear. But because Gen Z kids were never exposed to anything challenging or dangerous, they became afraid of everything. Now, the other side of this is how helicopter parents destroyed their children's social lives. Kids need free play to develop. Play is the work of childhood, as the saying goes. They need unsupervised, risky, child-led play. Play is crucial for children's development because it's the only way they can learn how to tolerate bruises, handle their emotions, read other children's emotions, take turns, resolve conflicts, and play fair. If they don't get that, they become children who no one wants to play with, and adults that no one wants to talk with. That's an awful position to be in, and really, they can't be blamed for any of this. These problems don't only happen on the psychological level, but they happen on a deeper neurological level. There are two neural circuits in the brain that balance each other, the behavioral activation system and the behavioral inhibition system. One is responsible for exploration and action, and the other for scanning for potential threats and avoiding them. Jonathan Haidt calls these the discover mode and defend mode for short. To activate the discover mode, kids need that risky, unsupervised play because that's what motivates them to explore and engage with the world. Having their discover mode switched on inoculates them against anxiety and teaches them how to handle new challenges. But Gen Z had their discover mode constantly shut off by their neurotic parents. When kids stay in defend mode, it makes them view everything as a threat and makes them live in a perpetual state of anxiety. Gen Z kids never got what they needed to develop into mature, confident, capable adults, and were systematically taught to be terrified of everything. We like to make fun of Gen Z, but they were dealt a really shitty hand. If you want to ruin your children, become a helicopter parent. Hooked from day one, how social media hijacked Gen Z's minds. This may be the cruelest experiment of them all. Gen Z were born online. I'm going to reveal how social media stunted their growth and how it negatively affected boys' and girls' mental health differently. The online world has been so integral in their childhood that we can't even begin to imagine what kind of effect that has. Everyone uses social media today, so what's the big deal? If we can handle social media, why can't they? But the thing is, we had normal childhoods. Gen Z didn't. We got social media when we were much older, so we could handle the addictive aspect of it a little bit better. We had the chance to be kids, make friends, play, and do what normal kids do. And our brains had the chance to wire up in a healthy way. Because Gen Z are the first generation to grow up with a daily dose of social media, no other generation can relate. And that's why they're not only miserable, but deeply misunderstood. When you're young, your prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed yet. This part of the brain is responsible for what's called executive functioning. This is your ability to focus your attention, to control your impulses, to delay gratification, and to make plans and actually execute them. You need these executive functioning skills to operate in the world as an adult, and the prefrontal cortex only really finishes developing at 25 years old. This is why the attention of Gen Z kids was so easily hijacked by the addictive nature of social media. Spending countless hours on screens didn't allow their prefrontal cortex to develop in the way it was supposed to. This is what Jonathan Haidt calls the great rewiring. Most kids literally become addicted, with average screen times ranging between 7 to 9 hours. And when you're addicted and not using your drug, you experience withdrawal symptoms. Anna Lemke is a neuroscientist who wrote a great book on addiction called Dopamination. She writes, "The universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria. Dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. It means you can't experience joy. So literally, these Gen Z addicts can't experience joy outside of their screens. They can't enjoy the real world. They're itching for that next fix. That's brutal." Now, besides the addiction part, being online has different consequences for boys and girls. For girls, the more social media they use, the more they spiral into depression and anxiety, and the more they hate themselves. Girls who spend 5 or more hours a day on social media are 3 times more likely to be depressed. Jonathan Haidt explains it like this: teens are particularly vulnerable to insecurity because their bodies and their social lives are changing so rapidly as they leave childhood. They struggle to figure out where they fit in the new prestige order for their sex. Nearly all adolescents care how they look, especially as they begin to develop romantic interests. All know that they will be chosen or passed over based in part on their appearance. But for adolescent girls, the stakes are higher because a girl's social standing is usually more closely tied to her beauty and sex appeal than is the case for boys. Puberty is awkward for everyone, but in the past, girls would compare themselves to other girls in their school and to a handful of movie stars and models. But today, young girls are bombarded with fake, photoshopped photos of Instagram models. It completely alters their perception of what beauty is and what they're supposed to look like. This alternate universe and this constant comparison cycle completely destroys them. If that's not enough, social media is also the perfect breeding ground for bullying. The way girls bully each other is through what's called indirect relational aggression. They'll gossip behind a girl's back and turn her friends against her. They'll destroy her reputation and send her anonymous messages of how worthless and ugly she is. and how nobody likes her and would rather she wasn't around. Before social media, a girl who was bullied could at least get a break from it when she came home. But now, she has no escape. The effect on boys is different. The real damage being online has on boys is that it takes them away from the real world. Being online means that they're not doing what they need to be doing in order to become men. This is one of the reasons for the failure to launch effect that so many Gen Z men are experiencing. Boys need to engage with the world and do hard things to gain real-life skills and competence. They need to take risks, but instead, many of them find it easier to withdraw into themselves and enter their online worlds. They become consumed by video games, which become a substitute for that sense of adventure and accomplishment. And they become addicted to porn, which satisfies their sexual instinct without all the fuss of having to overcome their fear of talking to women. They get that sexual fix without the possibility of rejection. Gen Z boys were exposed to hardcore porn so early on that later on they become addicted to it and they become desensitized. They start viewing women differently, and some really become disgusted with themselves. And they distance themselves from the possibility of a real-life relationship, which they're really craving. Gen Z have been dealt a bad hand. To top it all off, Gen Z kids were born into a terrible economy where the American dream doesn't really exist anymore. Working hard and owning a home is damn near impossible. The coddling they grew up with stunted their ability to handle challenges confidently and adjust in difficult situations, which makes them feel hopeless of ever progressing and becoming the masters of their own lives. Gen Z have been dealt a terrible hand, but hopefully they're a bit less misunderstood.